Professor's not on yet.
Okay.
Professor, are you on? Professor's coming on.
All right, we need to. Antoinette, just write it in the chat, please. Okay. Office on no.
Read it.
Okay, type it
I'm
in the.
here, my dear.
Hi, Prof. It's great to hear you.
Good afternoon.
I need to be able to see you. Why can't I see you? Oh, there you go. I'm seeing you now. And you can see everybody who's on, right? There's Lisa.
I have a problem sometimes when people share that my screen gets stuck.
Oh, okay. Well, you shouldn't happen. Right. It shouldn't happen. The only time we're sharing is right now. We're about to go on live. So it shouldn't happen.
All right.
All right. Antoinette.
Long time no see.
Wow, Yvonne, you're looking fabulous.
Thank you, Prof. I was saying good afternoon, long time no see. Professor Cooper.
She's not taking you on.
Institution situated within a tourism hub where networking and job opportunities are plentiful. The vibrant city of Toronto attracts visitors from around the world, creating a highly multicultural and welcoming city for all. As a result, the hospitality and tourism industries in Toronto are huge. In fact, the hospitality industry market has been set to create over 105,000 new jobs. Generated by the hospitality sector in Ontario is at almost 500,000. At Toronto School of Management, we have 5 programs to offer, which will help prepare you on your journey to an exciting and fulfilling career in hospitality and tourism. Ready to kickstart your career? Get in touch with us today. 5,000 new jobs. Generated by the hospitality sector in Ontario is at almost 500,000. At Toronto School of Management, we have 5 programs to offer. Hospitality and tourism. Ready to kickstart your career? Get in touch with us. 5,000 new jobs.
Greetings, everyone. The Department of Literatures and English is delighted that you could join us today in the virtual space through our YouTube channel. I am Aisha Spencer, acting head of the department for this academic year. We're elated to be here today to share a special moment with author Yvonne Bailey-Smith through the virtual book event that we're having today. Everyone. The Department of Literatures and English is delighted. She has recently published a skillfully crafted story about the impact of the migrant experience, introducing this narrative at first through the mind and sensibility of a child named Erna Annette Mullings. Myriad Publishers characterizes this novel as a compelling coming-of-age novel, which is engrossing, courageous, and psychologically insightful. Aida Amoko suggests that the childhood innocence of the early part of the novel provides a tender lens through which to view the traumatic events associated with both the act of departure and the individual tied to what that experience creates. The Turnaround blog placed The Day I Fell Off My Island as the book of the month in June 2021. And in the same month, The Guardian featured Yvonne Bailey Smith presenting the novel's details as reflecting social issues the author has encountered herself in more than 40 years as a social worker and psychotherapist. I have only just started reading the novel, but having lived in England for a few years during my childhood, I am already awed by the way the processing of the personal is shown to be such a crucial and needed part of the complex, rich, heavily documented history of Caribbean migration. We offer a special welcome to our guest author today, Yvonne Bailey Smith, and those who will play an important part in the progression of today's event. We have Ms. Yashika Graham, one of our MPhil candidates in the Literatures in English graduate program, who recently graduated from our undergraduate program as one of our outstanding performers in the area of Literatures in English. We have with us our well-known, well-loved Professor Caroline Cooper, a professor of literary and cultural studies, a former head of this department, West Indian author, literary scholar, and critic. We could go on, as she's the bearer of so many titles, known for her columns all of the time in the newspaper. Professor Cooper will be introducing our guest author today and is really responsible for helping us to recognize the greatness of this particular literary work. Ms. Lisa Brown, one of the lecturers in the Department of Literatures in English, will function as the moderator for the question and answer session. So we ask you to send your questions in the chat and they will be fielded to her for her to respond. And to all of you who are choosing, with all the different things that you have to do today, to be a part of this experience, a warm welcome to you from the Department of Literatures in English. If you are interested in the content we provide, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you enjoyed today's event, please go ahead and let us know by leaving a comment or giving us a thumbs up. I'm going to now ask Yashika Graham to take us over.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be reading two poems for you today. Both are taken from Kai Miller's 2007 collection, There Is an Anger That Moves. How quickly you grow. In this country, when you can't afford more than a tin of ackee, you might use mushrooms to stretch the pot. Beware how quickly you grow accustomed to this taste. For even in Jamaica, where your father's tree bears enough ackee to feed an entire street, you might find yourself still in search of mushrooms. Years later, an interviewer will ask, "What is it like living here?" You will tell him, "It's like ackee and mushrooms in the same pot. It's the ways you learn to stretch your nation. In this country, I have not become British, but my island has become wider." And after all, you do not know. In this country, having just arrived, you might be desperate enough to buy plantains online. After all, you do not know what is what or where to find things like ground provisions or heat or the sounds of your people. At night, you look through the hopeful window of a computer screen, waiting for Jamaica to come falling.
Thank you so much, Yashika. I am going to now hand over for the introduction of today's guest author to Professor Caroline Cooper.
Prof, unmute.
Unmute, please.
Someone went. Oh.
Professor Cooper, your mic is muted. We're asking you to unmute your mic, please.
Okay. Just taking top okay, go ahead.
There's a duppy in my house that, I just don't understand. Because anytime there's a screen sharing thing, my thing cuts out. Anyhow, let me see if I can press along. As soon as I heard that Yvonne was coming on holiday, I said, you have to come do a reading. I know she has done 1,000,001 readings since the novel came out, but she graciously agreed immediately that she would read a yard. And I'm so happy that she has done so. Now, Yvonne was born in Jamaica in 1954 and migrated to the UK in 1969. As I put it, grounded in the certainty of the nurturing culture of rural Jamaica, Yvonne survived transplanting and established new roots in a strange land, an unwelcoming land. She successfully negotiated her way in England, and as you heard, she trained first as a social worker before becoming a psychotherapist. And I'm sure that training in psychotherapy has been influential in her creative writing. Yvonne is also a water aid supporter and passionate about providing clean water and sanitation in developing countries. Yvonne's debut novel was published this year, as I think everybody now knows, and she has joined a distinguished group of writers who all had their first novel published relatively late in life. That's relatively late in life. For example, Daniel Defoe published his first novel, Robinson Crusoe, at the age of 59. Richard Adams published a classic, Watership Down, when he was 52, and he went on to publish over 20 other books. I don't know if Yvonne has 20 more books in her, but I know she has at least one. And Harriet Durr's debut novel, Stones for Ibarra, was published when she was 74, and it won the 1984 National Book Award for First Work of Fiction. So all of you people out there who have books in you, don't think it's too late, just start to write. Now, Yvonne is a mother of 3 children who are all creatives. I'm not gonna give away their names, I'm gonna leave it to her to tell you, but some of you who are very curious probably already found out that she have a big time daughter who, we're very proud to know is supporting her on this journey. So without any more intro, I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne so that you can hear from the book itself. Thank you. I'm going back to my study where I know me now be able to manage. It's just ridiculous.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Cooper. Where would you like me to go ahead?
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you again, Dr. Cooper, for the amazing introduction. I also just wanted to add very quickly that another good friend of mine, who I think Dr. Cooper also knows, Annie Domingo, actress, has just published her first novel at 72. And it's an amazing novel called Breaking the Matter Chain. Beautiful book. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start. I'm going to read from the very first chapter. So as you've heard, this book is a coming of age story about, tells the story of a young girl, Erna Mullins, Annette Mullins, who leaves Jamaica in 1969. So the novel kind of followed my timeline. People said, is it autobiographical? It's not, but it does follow my timeline. It was the easiest way, having decided to write my very first novel, to write a novel. And so I'm going to introduce you to Erna in chapter 1. And it's quite a short chapter, then I will stop and you can do what you guys do next. But perhaps before I go on, I need to say that in terms of Dr. Cooper, I met Dr. Cooper quite a long time ago when I arrived in Jamaica with my daughter, Zadie Smith, who is going to be reading here, was invited to read from her first novel, White Teeth. And if anyone had told me that I'd be back here all those years, as well, I think of 25 years plus ago, reading from my own novel, I would have said, don't be so silly. But here I am. So I'm going to say, excuse my patois. I believe I can still speak patois quite well if I'm talking to somebody, but reading it is a little, after 50 odd years in England, I know it's not quite the same. So please forgive me if I don't quite pronounce words as they should. But they're spelled correctly because Dr. Cooper made sure of that. So there you go. All right. I finally learned to ride a bicycle on my 21st birthday. It was an ambition I'd held from the age of 13 when I watched in awe and with a sense of envy as my teenage half-brothers, shirts open, rode their bicycles fast and fearlessly along the chalky road surrounding my father's village. I admired their freedom and was determined to experience the feeling for myself. The time came when, tired of being just a spectator, I persuaded Errol, one of the more amenable of my half-brothers, to give me a turn. He was quick to hand over his bike. He then watched with a bemused expression as I made several attempts to climb onto the very tall machine. The bicycle was old and temperamental, and my attempts to make it move soon sent me crashing into a clump of stinging nettles. When I looked up, a crowd of village boys had gathered. Most were howling with laughter, except one very tall, black-skinned boy who seemed intent on seeing what I was wearing under my skirt, which had hiked itself way too far above my knees. My shame was complete. Yet now, when I hop effortlessly onto my bicycle, I wonder why it took me so long to learn what turned out to be such a simple skill. Then I remind myself of the saying, nothing happens before it's time. I'm gonna have a little fan, I'm really quite hot. My life began on a typically hot day in August 1955 on the Caribbean island of Jamaica, where I was born to one Violet Pearl James. Violet was 13 and a half years old when Miss Melba, mother of 16, grandmother to many more, and the unofficial midwife of the entire district, delivered her own daughter of her first child. In time, she would deliver my mother of a further 3 children, a girl named Patricia and 2 boys, Clifton, and Sonny. It was my grandmother Melba who told me the story of my birth, although she hadn't been able to recall the exact date. However, she was certain that I was born on a Sunday and that my birth was registered some weeks later by her son, Cleveland. My uncle Cleveland was known for his love of the strong white rum produced on the island. Grandma Melba used to say, when him take the rum, it make him behave like fool man. And according to her, it was because he was drunk that he managed to lose a scrap of paper on which my name had been written, which is how I came to be registered with the name Erna instead of Irma. Cleveland had staggered back to the house and handed Grandma Melba the long strip of white paper with its columns completed in black ink in the most stylish handwriting. I beg you read out everything it said on the certificate, Grandma urged him. To my grandma, words on paper were just a jumble of confusion. She had never entered a schoolhouse, and as far as she was concerned, she learned everything she needed to learn from the fullness of the good Lord's book, which she would say was a forever learning something. Her Bible learning came from her infrequent visits to the village church, and as soon as I was old enough to read from me. Otherwise, she felt proud of what she knew. She had learned plenty about the land, how to look after my grandfather, their children and grandchildren, and how to help young women birth their babies safely. And now her daughter had left her to look after her baby while she went to work for a couple who lived in another village many miles away. Grandma Melba nodded along as Cleveland read from the birth certificate. Date of birth, 26th of August, 1955. Is that a Sunday? Yes, Miss Melba, it's a Sunday. Good. We're glad so you get that right at least, because a Sunday the child born. Cleveland continued. Mother's name, Violet Pearl James. Father's name. Them just put a line through this box, Miss Melba. You didn't tell me a name to give them. If he'd hoped that Grandma Melba would tell him who the father of his sister's child was, her silence left him unenlightened. Place of birth, Rose Hill District. Cleveland had taken his time to get to my name, as Grandma later told me. We could tell him forget something, but because of the rum inside him, him not did know what him forget. Child's name, Erna Annette Mullins. Erna? What kind of name that? Now, Irma Annette Mullins, me did tell you so the child name should be. You see how the rum mash up your head, Cleveland? You better pray to God for help you before you're dead. But Grandma knew there was no changing the name. She had registered enough babies to know that once a name was recorded in that great big book, that was it. So Erna, I became. I don't know how to dry up now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand over now to Ms. Brown, who will just moderate the question and answer session for us.
Okay, thank you so much. Yvonne, welcome, and thank you so much for sharing with us. It's wonderful to hear this story. And I think part of my response to it is, you know, as Professor Cooper says, it is never too late. Could you just start off while we get some questions from YouTube? What brought you to this story, eventually writing it down? Perhaps you could just tell us.
So this story, Lisa, I think the story, let me just sort of sort myself a little. I think the story has been in my head for a very long time. I think way back in my 20s. And it came about really, I think, because when I began to sort of work, I started working with young people when I was quite young myself. And I think I began to realize that there was a kind of whole, particularly for the immigrant children who I was working with, there was a whole level of something missing. for me. And I think I was recognizing that in myself as well. It was something about the psychology of our experiences, of their experience, of my experience, and having the sense that there was lots that just wasn't written about in terms of what children's experience of immigration, loss, separation can be. And I'm not saying in any way that it's all bad. I mean, lots of children want to migrate to join parents, or anybody for that matter. Lots of children want to move away from experiences that they may deem to be poverty experiences. But I still felt that I recognized in young people I was working with at that time, a lot of anger. And a lot of those young people were children of immigrants. They had arrived here. And I thought, well, who tells their story? Because their story is different to the stories of their parents.
Yes.
So that's really what got me thinking about this book. So it was kind of going around my head for a very long time. And I would drop little notes down over the years. And,
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it is very important that we recognize that there is anger on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, with kids whose parents, made difficult choices. In your work as a psychotherapist, as the years have progressed, have you got a sense that that gap or that cause for anger has found a way, some direction in a way, and has changed? Or is it something that's still true?
That's a massively good question. I think it's something that is still so very true. And this book really came to me because grown men and grown women my age, older men, older than me. I mean, the eldest person who's read my book is a 97-year-old Irish woman who her journey was from England to Ireland. But, people have been reading from this book from every ethnic group possible.
Yes.
And I have had grown people come up to me and said, I've read your book, you've just told my story. And some people have never talked about that story. And also, I just want to add, because I don't want to forget this, is that it isn't just, obviously the children's voice is huge, it has to be heard. But I realized in writing the book as well, the impact on everybody, the impact on the parents who bring the children, the impact on the grandparents who've been left behind, the impact on friends, extended family, the loss of so much. So yes, it's very much a very present story. And of course, there are new immigrants coming all the time in different circumstances. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful to know that the telling of one's story can cross so many ethnic and racial lines, because that sense of displacement, whether you're an adult or a child, is very palpable and remains with you. I love the title, "The Day I Fell Off My Island." What was driving that title? It's so catchy and building up all sorts of excitement.
That's the funniest part of writing this book. When I wrote the first draft, which was about 80 years ago, it was enormous. You've probably heard of Hilary Mantel, the historical writer, British historical writer. She writes doorstop books, and my draft was as big as that. And the title came, it just came, but in all the time I was writing the book, in my head, it was a working title until it went to the publishers, and the publishers said, this is a beautiful title. And I said, actually, it's a working title. And they said, well, it's a title that works.
Yes.
And, but I had no idea. I had no other title in my head. Nothing came. It was a working title, but nothing else came. So that's how it became The Day I Fell Off My Island. Mm-hmm.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. So we're still waiting on a couple of questions from the chat. Could you share with us your process? I realize, as you said, you had the huge draft. How did it actually come to be? Guide us through that a little.
It was an enormous draft. And I showed it to a few friends whose names are mentioned in the back of the book. Didn't show it to my daughter, was far too terrified to do that. So
Yes.
I showed it to my friends. And it seems that I had tried to write about every single thing possible. That I knew, that I remembered, that I created, that I generated it, ideas that I created. And I travel a lot. I've traveled a lot around the world, and some friends said to me, Yvonne, the first few pages really work, but the rest of it reads like a travel novel, a travel book rather. So, so when I began to rewrite it, I thought, let me see if I could develop something from these early pages. And so, yes, so I kind of took out, like, I don't know, about 40, 50,000 words and stuck them somewhere else and continued, working on this idea of that had been there all those years back. So is somebody asking a question there to me in the chat?
Dr. Spencer has a question here. What part did your professional experience in psychotherapy play in helping you to articulate the story of the character's journey?
I think that the part it played, I think it brought empathy. I think I have listened to so many horrendous stories, with some really horrendous journeys, that I think I really wanted to write these characters with warmth, because I feel that a lot of the time, the people who experience all kinds of traumatic experiences did not necessarily meet the empathy or the warmth that they need to help them on the next part of their journey. So I think I kind of was writing with my therapeutic hat on, if you like, in writing the story.
That is certainly, wonderfully helpful, especially for readers who can see or almost experience that kind of intervention and that kind of voice in the stories. Would you like to read another section, perhaps from the middle, something removed from the earlier sections?
Okay, well, shall I read you then? I think I will then read you the child landing, Erna's arrival in London.
Yes.
So I'm going to read you Erna's arrival. So,
thank you.
The plane landed with a jolt at London's Heathrow Airport and raced down the runway as though it had no intention of stopping. I took a deep breath and offered up a silent prayer, overwhelmed with relief that we had actually landed. It was the second time on that long journey that we'd made it back to Earth alive in a machine that seemed to be held up only by great puffs of white clouds and the desperate hope of us passengers to survive. I barely moved for hours. When we made our first stop somewhere in America for refueling, I risked a trip to the bathroom, but while the aircraft was in the sky, I feared that any extra movement would be enough to bring it tumbling to the ground. I might have been able to relax a little if so many people hadn't been moving aimlessly up and down the aisle like yo-yos, possibly risking everyone's safety. The hostesses had fussed and constantly asked people if they were okay. Of course no one was okay, we were all trapped. I refused to offer all offers of food and took only tiny sips of water to avoid any further toilet visits. When we finally landed, my hamstrings were so tight that I was unable to stand up straight for several hours. As the moment came for us to disembark, the pretty blonde hostess who had been so patient and kind throughout the journey tried in vain to reassure me. Think how lovely it will be to meet your mom, to see your mom and dad again, she said. I want to see her, and my father don't live in England, I replied crossly. Each time, she gently mopped the tears that poured from my eyes. Another torrent cascaded down my face. The room where I waited for the immigration lady to complete the seemingly endless pages of different colored forms for my entry into the UK was dank and cold, and the suit my mother had sent me to wear offered little protection against the autumn chill. My knees visibly shook and my teeth chattered as my skinny body struggled to cope with the cold that seemed to invade every inch of me. I tilted my head as far back as I could in a desperate attempt to stem further tears, but come they did, accompanied by my uncontrollable wailing. I felt as though I'd been torn from my island with no way of getting back. When the immigration lady finally handed back my plane ticket, I focused on the word minor, wondering over and over again what I'd done to find myself in such a terrible place. "Ready to go, Anna?" she said. "Your father is waiting for you." "Oh, dear God, no. Please don't let it be the ugly Satan devil man," I thought. "Where's my mother?" I asked the kind hostess who had waited for me in immigration. "It's your father who come to collect you, dear," she said. "Maybe your mother stayed behind to prepare a nice welcome for you." I felt I was stuck in a nightmare with no way out. I was thousands of miles from everything I knew, trapped in this cold, foreboding place full of people who looked extremely odd and talked in the strangest of manner. I didn't want to be here in this England place. Something in the faces of the strangers told me they didn't want me here either. To complete my misery, my mother had sent the one person I disliked most in the entire world to collect me. I didn't look at him as I climbed into the back seat of his clapped out Ford Cortina, ignoring his suggestion that I sit in the front. We traveled in silence along streets paved with asphalt, just like the big ones on my island. There wasn't a hint of gold anywhere. Peering into the semi-darkness, I could just make out endless rows of grey houses, all squashed together, each one with its own little front garden. Dense black smoke billowed from the rooftops. It was as inviting a vision as I could imagine. Finally, the car came to a halt outside a house that looked exactly like all the others we'd passed. The front sloped down into what I at first thought was some kind of gully, but turned out to be a lower living area. Why would anyone want to live underground, I thought? Surely that was a place for the dead. Above the battered black front door stood a further 3 floors of heartless bricks, red bricks. The ugly Satan devil man turned the key in the lock and the door swung open onto a hallway that felt even colder than the outside. The only apparent warmth came from the hideous clash of flowery patterns on the carpet and wallpaper. He ushered me into a large living room and then left. A gas fire with pretend flames hissed out the possibility of warmth from an alcove. I sat at the end of the sofa closest to the fire. My stomach churned with fear. I focused my attention on the room in which every surface was taken over by ornaments and plants. A cage full of plastic birds had prime position on a low glass table. A gangling rubber plant and a struggling geranium struggled for space in the far corner. The clash of patterns continued in the curtains, rugs, and sofa. The one note of consistency was that everything was some shade of orange, red, or brown. I shifted a little on the sofa and stared vacantly at the blank television screen. The first TV I'd ever seen the first TV that I'd ever seen, when a photograph in a wooden frame on the shelf above caught my eye. It was a photograph we'd taken before our mother had left for England over 3 years previously ago. I stood up and studied it carefully. All 4 of us children appeared to have eyes too big for our faces, staring with bewilderment into the camera. Our mother stood tall behind us, her beautifully elongated neck beneath her sharp-jawed face with eyes that seemed to veil some secret pain. Your mother gone to Brixton to get food shopping, the ugly Satan devil man said, sticking his head around the door frame. She should be back in the next half hour or so. I suppose you can't wait to see her, he offered. I didn't respond. Suddenly the front door slammed and I sprang to my feet. My mother walked past the open living room door, pushing a huge silver cross pram. Inside it, facing each other, were two fat baby girls dressed identically in thick knitted pink dresses and matching bonnets, and obviously twins. Following sluggishly in her wake was 3 more children, a girl and 2 boys. They looked thinner than I remembered. Patricia still had very short hair, but her face resembled that of a much older person to whom life had been unkind. The boys no longer had their little bellies and their bones stuck out. And Sonny now had a thick head of hair instead of that shiny, smooth little head our grandparents so loved to rub. My mother parked the pram at the far end of the hallway, leaving the twins strapped in. I could hear them babbling to each other in a kind of call and response, one prattling away for a short time, then the other taking over when she stopped. The next thing I knew, my mother was standing in front of me. "Hello, my dear," she said. "I'm glad you arrived safely." She too looked strangely altered. Her head was covered in a flowery scarf, but the wisp of hair that escaped from underneath it were not her own, but some kind of wig. She was wearing a thick brown coat and black Wellington boots. I didn't respond to her greeting. I was afraid of giving her the impression that I was actually happy to be here. Shall I continue a bit more or?
Oh, that's great. That's a wonderful section to have done. It had me on the edge of my seat. Wonderful. I just loved it. We have another question here. Were you at all focused on what you wanted the reader to experience when you started writing, or did you just feel the need to tell the story, or was it a mixture of both?
I think it's probably a mixture of both. I wanted the reader to find themselves in the book, so that was definitely a focus. But I also felt the need to tell the story, and I also think I was thinking, one of the bizarre things, and why I say that the experience for some children can be incredibly traumatic. My own journey to London, I was 14 years old, but I cannot tell you anything about that journey. I literally cannot tell you anything about that journey. I do not remember leaving the country. I come from St. Elizabeth. I do not remember being in Kingston. I do not remember the journey on the plane. Somehow I've literally blotted out that whole experience. But when I landed in Kingston on Friday, I think it was Friday, maybe Saturday, Friday. Can't remember, Friday. I looked across as the plane came down onto the tarmac, and I saw an old building. And I took a photograph. I can't remember what it said, but I am absolutely now sure that was the original Palisados Airport building. It's to the right, facing those hills. And that was quite something. That was really quite something to see, because I often land in Montego Bay.
Oh.
Yeah, so
yes.
yeah.
So you come to Kingston. Well, that's wonderful. As I was listening to this story and the way in which you share that sense of loss, the child would say, when my mother, it brought some memories back for me when my grand aunt came back to Jamaica. And I don't know if you knew about that episode in our country where a lot of persons came back to Jamaica and just went, right off their heads.
Yes.
How did that happen? I mean, I keep thinking with all our ideas about England and all of the wonderful things that we thought then, How is it so traumatic psychologically? You know, what happened to those people?
I think, I mean, you know, that's such a good question. I mean, often, for example, when you go to America, often a lot of my father's sons are in America. And when I used to visit them, they used to always talk about the mad people in England. So there's this concept, there's this notion that every Caribbean person in England, particularly Jamaicans, are quite mad. I think, you know, if I was shocked at the time that I turned up in '69, I cannot imagine what my mother and all my other relatives found when they went to that country. And if you remember, a lot of these people, they weren't all professionals, but a lot of people who went to England had professional skills. There were teachers, there were nurses, there were, you know, all kinds of things. And they thought they were going to be employed in those professions. Instead, they found themselves at beyond the bottom of the rung, being spoken to and being treated as if they were dirt. They were inhuman in very inhuman ways. And, you know, so I say we stand on their shoulders because they may not have spoken up. I mean, there were activists, and there are always activists and people who say, we're not having this. But the majority of people, it was survival, you know. And so when children like I turned up, there was no space, there was no psychological space to hold us. They were exhausted. They were, you know, and so we just had to get on with it in the same way, a little bit in the same way that they had to get on with it, but with some much worse behaviors even. Yeah. So I'm not surprised many came back to the island and the islands, and when they came, they became unwell.
Yeah. Yes, it was really very difficult because you could see that there was a life that had just been torn away from them, that, you know, they had absolutely nothing to depend on. But I think about the young British kids, parents, Caribbean and so on, these younger generations, what are some of their challenges? They are much the same, but is there any particular understanding of that move from the islands to England and what it means to probably come back and be on the football team or come back?
I think there is a generation of Jamaicans, and I think other islanders who do go home. They try, and they're born in England, but go home quite a lot, go to Jamaica, trying to connect, go to the St. Lucia, Trinidad, all the other places. And they are, you know, I think like anything, they're young people who are very aware of the issues, and their parents are on it. And there are other young people who are really struggling because their parents, for all kinds of reasons, have not been able to be there in the way they would want to be there for them. So the struggle still continues. So our young people still make up a massive numbers of people in the mental health system, for example. You know, in the prison system, it's completely disproportionate to our population. You know, our young people, young boys or young men are much more likely to be arrested and charged for anything, and they're much likely to get longer sentences. I do still do 1 day a week psychotherapy for the NHS. I work with mothers, new moms, or they have new babies, not necessarily a new mother, but have new babies whose mental health is compromised. And right next to the hospital, the clinic that I work is the mental health hospital adults. It's just full. It's heartbreaking to walk through the grounds. Heartbreaking. It's just full of young black males. But on the upside, there are also young black people in England who are kicking ass. They are amazing. They're doing incredible things. They're going off to Ivy League universities. They have great jobs in the city. Well, you know, making lots of money, bankers and they're teachers, they're science, they're also, all of those young people are doing everything that, you know, they would want to do or hope to do, but there's still many challenges. Yes.
Wonderful. So what's next for you on writing? I know it runs in the family, even, you know, so what's next for you?
So I'm currently working on a sequel to The Day, because when I finished it, I really missed my characters. They're in my head for such a long time. So I'm working on that. It's going well. And I'm also working concurrently. I haven't done as much work on it, but I have quite a lot of stories written already on a book of short stories as well.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous.
Yeah.
That's we look forward to all of your efforts, and we are so happy to have had you come and be with us today to share this wonderful new novel that's going to be a gem on either side of the Atlantic. And I'm going to hand you over to Dr. Spencer. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. And Yvonne, I'm just sitting here and there's so many questions that are pouring out, but we have to contain based on our 1 hour segment. I really think this novel does something powerful in the way it fuses the psychological with the literary. It has a kind of resonant feel of somebody like Erna Brodbaugh, as a, you know, when she writes as a sociologist. It brings to mind a kind of level, a deep level of consciousness that is present in, but also, you know, becomes possible through the fusion that occurs. And it really influences the style of the writer. I don't even know if you realize, just in terms of looking at your writing, the ways in which your vocabulary, the way that you structure the sentences, very kind of giving access to very complex things in a very simple way, that allows that kind of processing we spoke of earlier. And I just want to thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you for so much for coming, for being in this moment, for making it possible. We really appreciate this. I'm positive that this book is going to create conversations. And I think also it's a wonderful book to allow a kind of merging of generations, allowing generations to feel, you know, the different paths that each would encounter as a part of that journey, that migrant journey. I want to thank everybody today. Thanks to our special participants. Thanks to Prof. Cooper, who always brings humor to every situation when her mic wasn't working, and made us all feel that it was going to be a solvable moment anyway. Miss Lisa Brown, excellent questions, especially at the start, and for guiding us through and allowing through the questions a kind of connection with what our young people might be feeling now, particularly those who would have this kind of experience, and helping us to hear Yvonne's take on how that is possibly occurring and what the differences might be. Thanks to Miss Yashika Graham, we did have a little sound problem towards the end, but she was reading from the poetry of Kai Miller, who was speaking on that migrant experience, moving from Jamaica to England at a very different time, but you would have heard resonant feelings associated with it. Want to say special thanks to Miss Whitney Eaton and Miss Antoinette Jackson, who were an integral part of the creation and marketing of the flyer and giving us the technical assistance we needed today, just to be able to communicate through this virtual platform. And again, to all our viewers, thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. We look forward to having you view our different events throughout the academic year. Yvonne, thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. A massive thank you for inviting me, Dr. Carolyn Cooper, and to the University of West Indies. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed reading to you.
Do I have time to squeeze in one question?
Please do. I was waiting to see if you would come back. Absolutely, quickly.
How do you explain the complex creativity of you and all your children? Is what food I was eating?
Yam and ackee sausage.
How could all three of your children be so creative in their different fields?
You know, Jamaica, I think it's, I'm sure that I'll give their father a little bit of kudos as well, of course. But, you know, I think Jamaica is full of creativity. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of creative people actually in my family. We're full of musicians and actors and teachers and lawyers. And, you know, so we're not the first by any means. They're just carrying on a tradition. But I think it's something in the ackee and saltfish for me, I tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cooper. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. I'm so hot, Carolyn.
I know. Because you have on this hell of.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can hear you. Because I haven't, well, I needed to just cover my top. So I'm using my, but I was hot anyway. I was hot from the beginning. How did it go? I'm ending the meeting.